There was a time when game shows were simple entertainment, when contestants played by the rules and hosts asked the questions without ever expecting to become the ones being questioned. But what happened on Family Feud in November 2024 would change everything. When 47-year-old Catherine Walsh stepped up to that podium and made a decision that defied every convention of the show, she didn't just challenge the game. She challenged Steve Harvey to reconsider what he thought he knew about winning, losing, and what truly matters when the cameras are rolling. What unfolded in those next 20 minutes would leave the audience speechless, the producers scrambling, and millions of viewers reconsidering their own definitions of success. Before we continue with this remarkable story, if you value moments that challenge us to think differently about what really matters, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. We bring you the Family Feud moments that go beyond entertainment to touch something deeper in all of us. Catherine Walsh had spent 23 years as a nurse in the intensive care unit at St. Mary's Hospital in Portland, Oregon. She had seen life at its most fragile, holding the hands of patients in their final moments and celebrating with families when loved ones pulled through against impossible odds. Her own mother had passed away from cancer just 18 months before this Family Feud appearance, and Catherine had been the one to care for her in those final weeks, taking a leave of absence from work to ensure her mother's last days were filled with dignity and love. Catherine's mother, Eleanor, had been a woman of fierce principles. She had raised Catherine and her two brothers as a single parent after their father abandoned the family when Catherine was 7 years old. Eleanor had worked 2 jobs to keep the family housed and fed, but she had never complained. She had taught her children that character was measured not by what you had, but by what you gave, not by how much you won, but by how you treated others when winning wasn't possible. Eleanor had a saying that she repeated throughout Catherine's childhood: "The measure of a person is what they do when no one is watching and nothing is at stake." Catherine had gathered her family for this Family Feud appearance as a way to honor her mother's memory. The Walsh family consisted of Catherine, her husband Michael, her younger brother Thomas, her sister-in-law Jennifer, and her 19-year-old daughter Sarah. They had applied for the show together, hoping that the experience would bring them closer and create joyful memories during a time when they were all still grieving Eleanor's loss. They had even brought one of Eleanor's scarves, which Catherine wore around her wrist as a reminder of the woman who had shaped everything she believed about right and wrong. What Catherine did not anticipate was that within minutes of stepping onto that stage, she would face a situation that would test every principle her mother had instilled in her, a situation that would require her to choose between advancing in the game and standing up for something she believed mattered more than any prize money, a situation that would force Steve Harvey himself to stop and reconsider assumptions he had carried for years. The Walsh family had performed admirably through the first 3 rounds, winning 2 and keeping the score close in the third. They were facing the Patterson family from Georgia, a warm and competitive group that had their own compelling story. The Pattersons had brought their 78-year-old grandmother, who had recently survived a stroke and wanted one more adventure before her health declined further. The audience had fallen in love with both families, and the energy in the studio was electric with genuine affection for everyone on stage. The 4th round arrived, and it would determine which family would advance to fast money. The question appeared on the board: name something people do to get ahead at work. It was a straightforward question designed to generate answers about common workplace behaviors, both positive and negative. Catherine was at the podium, facing off against Mr. Patterson, the family patriarch. Both buzzed in simultaneously, but Catherine's light appeared a fraction of a second before his. Steve turned to Catherine with his signature encouraging smile. "Catherine, name something people do to get ahead at work." Catherine stood there for a moment, her hand touching the scarf on her wrist. She thought about her years in the hospital, about the politics and competition she had witnessed among medical staff, about the ways people positioned themselves for promotions and recognition. The obvious answers flooded her mind: work overtime, take credit for others' ideas, network with management, volunteer for high-profile projects. But she also thought about her mother, about the 23 years she had spent in intensive care watching what really mattered at the end of life. She thought about the patients who, in their final moments, never talked about the promotions they had won or the competitions they had beaten. They talked about the people they had helped, the relationships they had built, the moments when they had chosen kindness over advancement. Catherine took a deep breath and gave her answer: help their coworkers succeed. The audience murmured with appreciation. It was a positive, uplifting answer. Steve smiled and said, help their coworkers succeed. Good answer, good answer. The board revealed the response. It was there, but it was the sixth answer with only 4 points. Mr. Patterson gave his answer: work longer hours. It was the number 2 answer with 28 points. The Patterson family would play the board. As Catherine returned to her family, something was bothering her. She watched as the Patterson family worked through their answers, calling out the predictable responses that the survey had captured: kiss up to the boss, take credit for others' work, backstab coworkers. Each answer was on the board, each one reflecting the often cynical reality of workplace competition. The Patterson family was doing well, racking up points with answers that reflected behaviors most people recognized even if they didn't admire them. But with each answer, Catherine felt a growing discomfort. Her daughter Sarah, standing beside her, noticed her mother's expression and whispered, "Mom, what's wrong?" Catherine whispered back, "Those answers are all about stepping on other people to get ahead. Is that really what we want to celebrate?" The Patterson family missed their third answer, giving the Walsh family a chance to steal. All they needed was one answer on the board to take all the points the Pattersons had accumulated. It was a golden opportunity, the kind of moment that could determine the entire game. Steve approached the Walsh family, and they huddled together to discuss their strategy. The conversation was quick and focused. Michael suggested work weekends, which was almost certainly on the board. Thomas proposed volunteer for extra projects, which also seemed likely. Sarah suggested go back to school, another safe bet. But Catherine stood quiet, her hand again touching her mother's scarf. When Steve called time and asked for their answer, Catherine stepped forward. What she said next would change everything. "Steve, before we give our answer, I need to say something, and I need to ask you something." Steve's expression showed surprise, but he nodded. "Go ahead, Catherine. What's on your mind?" Catherine took a deep breath and addressed not just Steve, but the entire studio audience and the cameras that would broadcast this moment to millions. "Steve, I've been watching this round, and I've been listening to the answers on the board. Every single answer except mine has been about how people step on each other, manipulate each other, or sacrifice their integrity to get ahead. And I understand that's what the survey said. I understand those are honest answers about how people actually behave." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "But my mother passed away 18 months ago, and in her final days, she told me something I've been thinking about ever since. She said that the world we live in is the world we create through the choices we make every single day. She said that every time we celebrate the wrong things, every time we normalize behaviors that hurt others, we make it harder for good people to do the right thing." The studio had gone completely quiet. Steve was listening intently, his expression serious and thoughtful. Catherine continued, her voice steady but emotional. "Steve, I'm standing here with my family on national television, and millions of people are going to watch this. Children are going to watch this. Young people trying to figure out how to navigate their careers are going to watch this. And I have to ask myself, what message are we sending when we turn workplace manipulation and backstabbing into entertainment? When we make it seem normal, even funny, to step on other people to get ahead?" Steve set down his cards, a gesture he rarely made during gameplay. "Catherine, are you saying you have a problem with the question?" "No, sir," Catherine said quickly. "The question is fine. It's asking what people do, not what they should do. But I'm saying I have a problem with celebrating those answers without acknowledging that there's another way. A better way. The way my mother lived her life." Steve looked at her thoughtfully. "What was your mother's way?" "Catherine, she taught me that real success isn't about getting ahead of other people. It's about bringing people along with you. It's about making the people around you better, not tearing them down to make yourself look good. She worked 2 jobs for 20 years to raise 3 kids alone, and she never once complained about the people who had more than her or blamed other people for her struggles. She just kept showing up, kept helping people, kept doing the right thing even when it cost her. Catherine's voice broke slightly, and when she was dying, Steve, her hospital room was filled with people, coworkers from jobs she had left decades ago, neighbors she had helped, people whose lives she had touched by choosing kindness over competition. That's what success looked like at the end of her life. Not the promotions she never got or the recognition she never received, but the relationships she had built by treating people with dignity and respect. The audience was silent, many dabbing at their eyes. Steve Harvey, known for his quick wit and humor, stood completely still, absorbing what Catherine had said. Then Catherine did something that stunned everyone. "Steve, I want to ask you a question, if that's okay." Steve nodded slowly. "Go ahead. You've been hosting this show for over a decade. You've had this incredible platform, this opportunity to reach millions of people every week. When you go home at night and think about the impact you're having, what matters to you? Is it the laughs and the entertainment, or is it something more? Do you ever think about the messages we're sending when we normalize certain behaviors just because they're common?" Steve Harvey stood there, and for perhaps the first time in Family Feud history, he appeared genuinely at a loss for words. The studio remained silent, waiting to see how he would respond to a question that had turned the entire dynamic of the show upside down. Finally, Steve spoke, his voice quieter and more serious than the audience had ever heard it. "Catherine, I'm going to be honest with you. In all my years of doing this show, no one has ever stopped the game to ask me a question like that. No one has ever challenged me to think about the bigger picture of what we're doing here." He walked closer to Catherine, looking directly at her. "You ask me what matters when I go home at night. The truth is, I do think about it. I think about the fact that I have this platform, this opportunity to reach millions of people. And sometimes I wonder if I'm doing enough with it, if I'm using it the way I should." Steve turned to address the studio audience. Catherine just did something incredibly brave. She stopped a game she could win to talk about something she thinks matters more than winning. She challenged all of us, including me, to think about what we're celebrating and what messages we're sending. He looked back at Catherine. "Your mother sounds like she was an extraordinary woman, the kind of woman who understood that the real game in life isn't about beating other people, it's about becoming the kind of person who makes other people's lives better." Then Steve made a decision that would become one of the most talked about moments in television history. He called the producers over to the stage, speaking with them briefly while both families and the entire audience waited in suspense. When Steve turned back to the families, his expression was resolute. "We're going to do something different here. Catherine, you asked me a question, and I want to answer it with action, not just words. I'm going to ask the producers to change how we handle this round." He addressed both families directly. The Patterson family played honestly and well. The Walsh family has a chance to steal. But instead of just moving forward with the game as usual, I want to do something that honors what Catherine just said. I want to acknowledge that there is another way to think about getting ahead at work. Steve turned to the audience. How many of you watching have ever helped a coworker succeed, even when it didn't benefit you directly? How many of you have chosen integrity over advancement? How many of you have made decisions like Catherine's mother, putting people over politics? Hands went up throughout the studio. The audience was engaged in a way that transcended typical game show energy. Steve continued, "Catherine's right. We normalize what we celebrate, and while this survey reflects how people often behave, we have a choice about what we emphasize, what we highlight, and what we hold up as worthy of respect." He looked at the Walsh family. "Catherine, do you have an answer to steal the board?" Catherine nodded. "We could say work weekends or volunteer for projects, and we'd probably steal the points. But Steve, with your permission, I'd like to say something else. I'd like to give the answer my mother would give. The answer that might not be on the board but represents the way she lived her life. Steve gestured for her to continue. What would your mother say? She would say, treat everyone with respect, from the janitor to the CEO, because character is how you treat people who can do nothing for you. That's how you really get ahead in life, even if it's not how you climb the corporate ladder. The answer was not on the board. The Walsh family lost the steal, and the Patterson family won the round. But something remarkable happened next. Mrs. Patterson, the family matriarch, stepped forward with tears streaming down her face. Steve, can I say something? Steve nodded. Catherine, I want you to know that your mother raised you right. My grandmother is here with us today, and she's 78 years old. She had a stroke 6 months ago, and we didn't know if she would ever be able to do something like this again. We brought her here because we wanted to create one more joyful memory while we still could. Mrs. Patterson's voice was thick with emotion. But watching you stand up here and honor your mother's memory by speaking truth, that's going to be the memory we take home. Not the points we scored or whether we win money. The memory of a woman who loved her mother enough to risk losing a game to stand up for what she taught her. She turned to her own grandmother, who was seated with the family. Grandma, is that okay with you, that we might remember this moment more than winning? The elderly woman stood slowly, supported by her family members, and spoke in a voice that was soft but clear. Baby, I've lived 78 years on this earth. I've seen people win and lose at all kinds of things. But the people I remember, the people who mattered, were the ones who stood for something bigger than themselves. This young lady just did that. That's worth more than any game show prize. The studio erupted in applause. Steve Harvey stood in the middle of the stage, visibly moved, wiping tears from his eyes. He raised his hand for quiet. Ladies and gentlemen, I've been doing television for over 30 years. I've hosted shows, I've performed comedy, I've talked to thousands of people, but I can honestly say that what just happened here is one of the most powerful moments I've ever experienced on television. Steve looked at both families. Both of you are going to fast money. I don't care what the rules say. These two families just showed us something more valuable than following the standard format. They showed us what it means to honor the people who shaped us, to stand up for principles even when it costs us, and to recognize that some moments matter more than winning. The audience rose to their feet in a standing ovation that lasted several minutes. When the episode aired 5 weeks later, the response was immediate and extraordinary. The segment went viral within hours, but it sparked something different from typical viral moments. This was not about shock value or entertainment. It was about a message that resonated with millions of people who were tired of celebrating the wrong things, tired of normalizing behaviors that hurt others, and hungry for examples of people who stood for something more meaningful than personal advancement. Within 48 hours, the hashtag #IllinorsWay was trending on social media, referring to Catherine's mother and her philosophy of bringing people along rather than stepping on them to get ahead. Thousands of people shared stories of their own parents or mentors who had taught them similar lessons. Workplace culture consultants and business ethicists began using the clip in training sessions and presentations about ethical leadership. Steve Harvey kept his promise to think more deeply about the messages his platform sent. 2 weeks after the episode aired, he announced a new initiative on his talk show. He would be creating a regular segment highlighting people who chose integrity over advancement, who helped others succeed even at personal cost, and who embodied the principles Catherine had described. The segment would be called Eleanor's Legacy, honoring Catherine's mother. The first episode of Eleanor's Legacy featured Catherine herself, along with several people who had been touched by her mother's life. A former coworker described how Eleanor had trained her for a promotion that Eleanor herself wanted, simply because she believed the other woman needed the opportunity more. A neighbor talked about how Eleanor had organized meal delivery for his family when his wife was ill, coordinating dozens of volunteers while working her own 2 jobs. But the most powerful testimony came from one of Catherine's former ICU patients. The man was now 65 years old, healthy and thriving. He described how 15 years earlier, Catherine had cared for him after a serious accident. "I was at my lowest point," he said. "I was in constant pain, I had lost my job, and I felt like my life was over. Most of the medical staff treated me professionally but kept their distance. Catherine was different. She talked to me like I mattered. She encouraged me when I wanted to give up. She advocated for better pain management when other nurses might have stuck to the standard protocol." He continued, "One day I asked her why she cared so much, why she went above and beyond for someone like me. She said her mother had taught her that everyone deserves to be treated with dignity, especially when they're at their most vulnerable. That conversation changed my life. I decided that if I survived, I would live differently. I would treat people the way Catherine treated me." The man revealed that he had gone on to become a volunteer counselor for accident survivors, helping hundreds of people navigate the trauma and recovery process. "All of that started because one nurse chose to treat me like I mattered. Because someone's mother taught her daughter the right way to live." 3 months after the episode aired, Catherine received a letter that would become one of the most cherished possessions of her life. It was from a high school teacher in Ohio who had shown the Family Feud clip to her business ethics class. The teacher wrote, "Your moment on Family Feud sparked the most meaningful discussion we've had all year. My students are 17 and 18 years old, about to enter the workforce. They've been told their whole lives that success means beating other people, getting ahead at any cost, and looking out for number one. Seeing you risk losing to stand up for a different definition of success opened their eyes to another possibility." The teacher included dozens of essays her students had written in response to the clip. Essay after essay described personal revelations about what truly mattered, stories of grandparents or parents who had embodied Eleanor's principles and commitments to approach their own careers differently. One student wrote, "I always thought my grandfather was unsuccessful because he never got promoted past middle management. But after watching Catherine Walsh honor her mother, I realized my grandfather was incredibly successful. He was the person everyone came to for help. He was the one who trained new employees, even though it took time away from his own work. He was the one who stood up for people who were being treated unfairly. That's success. That's what I want to be." 6 months after the episode aired, Steve Harvey hosted a special reunion show featuring both the Walsh and Patterson families. The show had expanded into a broader conversation about workplace culture, ethical leadership, and the principles that create lasting success versus short-term advancement. During the reunion, Steve revealed something that surprised everyone. "After Catherine asked me that question on Family Feud, I went home and I couldn't stop thinking about it. I called a meeting with all my production teams across all my shows. I told them that we needed to think more carefully about what we celebrate, what we normalize, and what messages we send to our audiences." He continued, "We've made changes to how we approach questions, how we respond to answers, and how we frame the discussions on all my shows. We're not just about entertainment anymore. We're about using our platform to elevate the conversation, to highlight the best in people, not just the funniest or most shocking." Steve looked directly at Catherine. "You did that. You challenged me to question everything, and I'm better for it. My shows are better for it. And based on the response we've received, our audiences appreciate it too." Catherine's response reflected the humility and grace that had characterized her mother. "Steve, I didn't do anything special. I just tried to honor my mother's memory by standing up for what she taught me. But what you've done with your platform since then, that's extraordinary. You took a moment of challenge and turned it into lasting change. That's leadership." The Patterson family shared their own update. The grandmother who had survived the stroke had been inspired by the episode to write down her life lessons for her grandchildren and great-grandchildren. "I realized after that day that I had lived 78 years learning what really matters, and I hadn't written any of it down," she explained. "If I didn't record these lessons, they would die with me. So I started writing, and now I have a book of wisdom to pass down to future generations." 1 year after the episode aired, a business school professor published a case study analyzing the Catherine Walsh moment and its impact on workplace culture discussions. The study documented measurable changes in how companies approached their ethics training, with many incorporating the clip into their onboarding programs. Several major corporations had revised their promotion criteria to include metrics for collaboration and mentorship, not just individual achievement. The study also tracked social media conversations about workplace ethics and found a significant shift in how people talked about career success. Before the episode, online discussions about getting ahead at work were dominated by tactical advice about networking, self-promotion, and competitive positioning. After the episode, the conversation had broadened to include extensive discussions about integrity, collaboration, mentorship, and sustainable success built on helping others. 5 years later, the impact continued to compound. The Eleanor's Legacy segment on Steve Harvey's talk show had featured hundreds of people who embodied principles of ethical leadership and service to others. Several of these individuals had gone on to write books, launch nonprofits, or create programs that spread their philosophies more widely. Catherine herself had left her ICU position to become a consultant for hospitals on ethical patient care and staff culture. She traveled the country training nurses and doctors on how to maintain humanity and compassion in high-pressure medical environments. She always began her presentations with the story of her mother and the Family Feud moment, using them as launching points for deeper discussions about what it means to measure success by impact rather than advancement. During one presentation, a young doctor raised his hand and said, "Everything you're describing sounds wonderful, but the reality is that in medicine, people who focus on helping others often get overlooked for promotions and leadership positions. How do you reconcile that with the pressure to advance your career?" Catherine's response became widely quoted in medical ethics circles. "You're absolutely right that the system often rewards the wrong behaviors. But here's what I learned from my mother and what I saw confirmed in 23 years of ICU nursing. The people who focus on getting promoted might get the title, but the people who focus on helping others get the legacy. 20 years from now, which do you want? A bigger office, or the knowledge that you made suffering people feel seen and valued in their darkest moments? An impressive title, or the memory of a patient who survived because you advocated for them when it would have been easier to follow standard protocol?" She continued, "My mother never got promoted past entry-level positions at her jobs. She died with very little money and no impressive titles. But at her funeral, we had to move to a larger venue because so many people wanted to come pay their respects. People she had worked with decades ago. People whose lives she had touched through simple acts of kindness and dignity. That's a legacy. That's success that lasts beyond quarterly reviews and promotion cycles." 10 years after that memorable Family Feud episode, a documentary was produced examining how one moment on a game show had influenced workplace culture conversations across multiple industries. The documentary traced the ripple effects through education, business, healthcare, and nonprofit sectors, showing how Catherine's challenge to Steve Harvey had sparked broader questions about what society values and celebrates. The documentary included interviews with dozens of people whose lives or careers had been influenced by the episode. A corporate executive described how watching the clip had prompted him to completely restructure his company's promotion process, emphasizing collaboration and mentorship over individual achievement. An entrepreneur talked about how the episode had inspired her to build her company culture around Eleanor's principles from the start. A teacher explained how she used the clip every year to help students understand the difference between achievement and significance. In the documentary's closing scene, Catherine stands at her mother's grave, now joined by a thriving community of people who gather annually to honor Eleanor's memory and share stories of how her principles continue to influence their lives. Catherine speaks directly to the camera with the wisdom of someone who has seen the long-term impact of one moment of courage. "People sometimes ask me if I regret risking the game that day, if I wish I had just given a safe answer and won the money. The answer is simple: that moment gave me something far more valuable than $20,000. It gave me the opportunity to honor my mother in a way that would have made her proud. It gave me a chance to speak truth to millions of people. And it sparked a conversation that has helped change how we think about success, achievement, and what it means to live a meaningful life. She continues, "My mother used to say that the measure of a person is what they do when no one is watching and nothing is at stake. But I learned something that day on Family Feud. The measure of a person is also what they do when everyone is watching and everything is at stake. When you have a platform and a choice between comfort and courage, between winning and truth, telling, between advancing yourself and standing for something bigger, that's when character is truly tested." The documentary ends with a powerful statistic. Since Catherine's Family Feud appearance, over 15,000 people have publicly shared stories of choosing integrity over advancement, collaboration over competition, and service over self-promotion, directly citing her example as their inspiration. Countless others have made similar choices privately, influenced by a message that began with one woman's decision to honor her mother's legacy by questioning what truly matters. As the screen fades to black, Steve Harvey's voice offers a final reflection from an interview conducted for the documentary. "Catherine Walsh taught me that my job is not just to entertain. It's to elevate. She taught me that every moment on television is an opportunity to celebrate the right things, to normalize the behaviors that make the world better rather than the behaviors that just help individuals get ahead. She questioned everything I thought I knew about my role as a host, and in doing so, she made me better at my job and more thoughtful about the impact I have." That's what real courage looks like. That's what making a difference looks like. The story of Catherine Walsh's daring move on Family Feud reminds us all that the most important moments in life often come when we choose principle over prize, when we speak difficult truths instead of giving easy answers, and when we honor the people who shaped us by living according to their values, even when it costs us something. Her mother Eleanor never appeared on television, never won any prizes, and never received public recognition. But through her daughter's courage to honor her memory, Eleanor's legacy reached millions and continues to influence how we think about success, character, and what it means to truly get ahead in life. If this story resonated with you and reminded you of what genuinely matters, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. We share these powerful moments because they challenge us to think differently about success and inspire us to live according to deeper principles. Share this video with someone who needs to remember that real achievement is measured not by how far you climb, but by how many people you bring along with you. And remember that the next time you face a choice between getting ahead and doing right, your character will be defined by the decision you make in that moment. Choose wisely, choose courageously, and choose the path that would make the people who shaped you proud.